we've said $150,000 in operating expenses per year for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Where do we get the buy-in from those people who are concerned about where they're going to be able to pay their rates?
Yeah, but and that's fair comment. I suppose if we trim this back to what actually is the purpose of it's the methodology of getting community support for whatever physical work or infrastructure that you might put in place. I suppose that's it. I mean, traditionally we might, as I said before, without being facetious, traditionally we might
Something.
Well, no, traditionally we've done various things. Traditionally we have drawn plans up and then we've gone out and consulted on those plans and then we've built it. We have occasionally done trials. For example, I'm old enough to remember the central Thames Street in Morrinsville actually been drawn in white paint at the Morrinsville Rec Ground to actual scale, because people were concerned that they wouldn't be able to park diagonally and parallel and still manoeuvre back onto the road. So that was the methodology we used then. I suppose what's been proposed for the trial in Morrinsville, somewhat more elaborate, but is it justified? At the end of the day, there's different ways of approaching it. What's an approach that is meaningful and gets buy-in?
Sarah Jane.
I'm just looking at the Morrinsville Place plan, and so the two bigger budgets there are the pedestrian street test events and the town centre accessibility program.
Yep.
What's the difference?
Accessibility is about through transport choices or an ally to transport choices for disabled people.
That's a value.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the visually impaired, physically impaired, that sort of thing.
So how does that not come under the pedestrian street testing? I would have thought they would kind of.
I'm
just really
think sure. I think the other one, which we've discussed briefly, is the identification of an area where events can take place, how that might be constructed. In fact, I can remember Councillor Horn mentioning the idea of retractable bollards, even in other words, during the week it still can be used for, if it was Canada Street, for example, you could close it off and you might redesign the surfaces, you know, instead of having a road construction, you might have a paved construction. But it's a case of how do we, because history tells me that whenever you change a streetscape in town, it's usually highly controversial. So, yeah, that's right.
We know now.
We know. So, what is the best way to approach this?
Can I just, that meeting last night told me that the chamber are very supportive of doing something in the main street.
Yes.
And I thought it might have been the other way about.
Yes, I do.
All right. So I'm not against doing something. I want to make sure that what we do is appropriate and acceptable to the people before we go and spend the money. Let's come up with, you know, to say town centre accessibility program, 60,000. If we can say exactly what we're going to do or what we'd like to do, go back to the community and go back to the chamber, the two distinct groups, all right, and say, hey, these are some ideas, and I think we'll get some buy-in.
So it's comms.
It's comms. It's comms consultation. All right. Sorry.
I'm kind of with Bruce on this, and it's a general comment. when you look at who is sitting around the commerce table, it's business owners who potentially aren't going to be affected the way our normal community is going to be with decisions that we make. We want the Chamber of Commerce to sit there and become detached of what they perceive should be done in the community and not take the bigger picture of what the community is currently going through.
It's both groups.
Yeah, that's my viewpoint. I want them to work with council, not look at it just from a business perspective of who's around the table.
So, sorry, just to get clarity. So there's question of the outcome and question of the process. Get to that outcome because we've got 4.2 million, which is targeted at various aspects, some of which perhaps don't necessarily result in strict physical outcome. For example, I think there's a recommendation there to buy some equipment to allow events or trials to take place. It might be barriers or orange cones or whatever it might be. There's a proposition in there to look at social seating in Matamata, for example, wayfinding, which is about signage. So I suppose what would be perceived, well, what the concern as to how the community might perceive particular things. Does that include physical works as well, or is it just the process of establishing what the physical work might be?
So I'm looking at year one, summer activity series under the Oaks for 60K. That's got to go.
I know there's a bigger picture there, but again, it's something that's, is it a want or is it a need? And I know there's an outcome you're driving.
And we've lost the support of the chamber at the moment.
Yeah, I'm concerned that because a lot of this work, yes, you've got a pop team, but it pulls in roading people, it pulls in comms people, and
Fair.
And it's always bigger than what it is. God, my laptop's talking to. And it just worries me that the perception of these series under the trees, and we've said we don't run events, and this effectively is an event, and it's significant.
Yeah, and then I think in year two we were going to spend 70 grand on lights. Well, once again, Erin, it's tough. It's tough out there.
So,
yeah.
So,
Can I just maybe clarify a little bit?
Yeah.
That's okay, because it might be helpful. Sorry.
Go for it. Yeah.
So in terms of the Hatana Reserve Summer Series, so 40,000 of that is from your LTP CapEx. So that's
Doesn't
not
matter
for
where
that.
it's from, Erin.
Yeah, so I
Doesn't
just
matter
wanted to.
where it's from.
Yeah, so the idea of the summer series, and I'm meeting with Steve next week, is that council wasn't like running it. We're going to work with the community around that. So that was an indicative budgetary amount for that. Then in terms of the talented accessibility program, so as alluded to there, we've obviously got quite a bit of money from other sources, including Transport Choices. And the accessibility program, that really is recognising that we've had some audits done in the past. So this was a really great opportunity to actually get that stuff happening. So the idea is to complement that aspect. And then I guess that my observation just in terms of like Bruce, in terms of the Morrinsville aspect, is that in my experience working on these sorts of things, is that the relational component is like hugely important. And so if we're going to make a really good list of that, you've actually got to have the resource and the time put into it to keep everyone on board, whether it's the businesses, the community, because you're quite right, it's a huge piece of work, and you kind of got to be all in and go really hard to keep everyone on the journey with you. And that's kind of, and that's my experience in running these kind of projects. So I hope that's a little bit of context maybe, but I appreciate the point around, you're right, perception and the timing and that. So I fully appreciate that, but I just thought that might be a little bit helpful to provide a little bit of context. So thanks, Bodhi.
James.
Which one?
Yeah.
And you're right, it's a hard balance to find, we don't want to lose the momentum of the pop. They've done some really good work up till now. Timing's really unfortunate for some of those things. And I think, part of what we've been saying, I think Sue's already said that today as well, is that we're wanting to see actual physical outcomes from this money and the work that we're doing. And I mean, the likes of the one-way trial would still lead to a physical change. So those are the sort of things that I'm kind of interested in. It's interesting this again, so you make that comment about your chamber. I mean, we were pleasantly surprised, I suppose, last night. It hasn't always been that pleasant in those meetings, but it was good last night. And just to pick up on your point, Sharon, I think about you're saying, hey, there's those are the businessmen sitting around there, and I accept and take that point on board. But I think when it comes to and I think, the 10th Street would be, he says, not knowing, a little less contentious in Hatana. But the chamber, if they're keen on that, I mean, they can actually canvass those businesses in the affected area for us effectively. They would actually play quite a part, I would think, certainly all those ones that are members of the chamber, of course, but I think they play a major, they give a major impact in terms of finding out that feedback for us, even before we go to formal consultation or do the trial. So I think that gives us some really good information. So it's trying to find the balance as we always have to around the stable, isn't it? So firstly, whatever funding we do and whatever we do with that funding, the communication around that's got to be super, super clear about where that funding's come from. Secondly, I think under the current economic climate, if we seem to be doing too many eventy type things, I take your clarification here on board, but it's perception, isn't it? So we've got to find the appropriate middle ground here.
James.
Yeah, I guess just following on from James. So my recollection is that the council's already endorsed this plan, right? So we've already said, yes, we think these things are all good ideas. It's now just about finding funding for it. And essentially the request today was, can we use some amount of better funding to deliver the plan that you as a council, not Erin, but the council has already endorsed that we're doing these things. So that for me is the question. And then the point is that in this economic environment, is it still appropriate to do any of these things? And so I guess the question would be, $5,000 from Transport Choices to do the library story walks. That's not from the better funding. Are we going to do that? Because that's still doing something in the current economic environment that is going to cause ill will potentially. Yeah. And if we're going to go down that path of the environment's not right, I was beaten over the head, but I was not beaten over the head about POP. I was beaten over the head about some other projects that are nice to haves. And if we want to start talking about cutting costs just because it's not the right time, I want to have the bigger discussion. So either we park this now and have that bigger discussion offline, but I'm not comfortable just declining this now because in isolation of the bigger environment and the bigger things that we should be talking about. So yeah, that's the story. Basically, we've endorsed it. We made a commitment to the community to find funding for it. That's all part of it. If we're cutting, if we're not going to do that because we're not comfortable with the optics, we need to have the bigger discussion about the optics and what other things need to do, regardless of where the funding comes from, but because it doesn't look good.
I have no problem with the philosophy. I have no problem with working together with the community. I have no problem. However, since this came out and our 16.9 came out, life has changed a little, and I just can't feel comfortable doing a lot of these things when I was harassed along, admittedly, from a segment of the market of our community about how we spend our money. And we have got to face the fact that we have a load on a lot of people with their rates. And I just think it would be very bad to be putting lights up, doing, you might say we're not going to do it ourselves, but, we're going to just give a project manager 40 grand to do something. Those are not the right time for them.
So I suppose that getting a sense that, is it about the outcome or the process? I mean, are we not wanting to spend money on lighting in the Oaks or putting power points in there or some other equipment or looking at one laning monitor, or is it about the expense of establishing feedback or acquiring feedback and seeking endorsement? What I just
Caleb.
I've been listening and everyone has made some pretty salient points that we've communicated to everyone with our rates rise that we're going to be cutting back as much as we can, right? We've said we're going to save money, we're going to be more prudent and be more savvy with our money, all these sorts of really encouraging things. And if we decide, actually, yeah, we've told everyone we're saving money and then we fork out 100 and 200 and something grand just in these things for the payroll. That's not good for us. I like the pop idea is a brilliant idea, and these things are good to do. It's just not a good to do right now. And some of these things need to be done, and some of them really don't need to be done. And that's perhaps a discussion for a separate time. But I just think if we're going to be consistent with what we're saying to the people, if we've said we are going to cut back on spending and be more prudent, then let's be more prudent and win back the trust of the people who we've just burned somewhat.
So I'm going to talk about Morris. Established place champions network group, 2,500. It's a minor operational cost. Okay, and I think that we need to have those groups in place for you to be able to do the consultation process. Add more greenery to the town, $5,000. We did that 2 weeks ago with the tree outside.
golden elm.
Pedestrian street test events, $50,000 now. It's a big. $50,000 is a lot of money. If I knew what those test events were, all right,
That was what I was.
then I would like, then, if you come to me and say, this is what we're going to spend it on. At the moment, it's just it's a plot, isn't it? All right, okay, and I don't know what small space activation 10,000 is, but the town centre accessibility program. We get a lot of people saying we should have better access here, there, and everywhere. If we were to be able to say that we're going to spend $60,000 on this, that's when I'll get a buy-in. All right, but it's too
Vague.
airy fair. It's too global or whatever at the moment. So let's come back. So I could endorse this in concept, but not approve it for expenditure.
Just a replan, maybe.
Jane.
Be more specific.
I guess everybody, for the most part, is coming from one side of it, and I always like to say, well, here's the other side of it. I guess to even the argument out a little bit, I don't disagree with anything that anybody said about, the optics of doing these things. But the other side of the coin is we've just had a 16.9% rates increase, and everybody goes, what do we get for our money? So if you stop doing a whole lot of these things, then they've really got a case for what do we do for our money, because they don't see anything happening. So while I don't agree with some of these things, like $50,000 to do a pedestrian, as it's written there, seems crazy. Like, to me, $2.5 grand on a skate park, there's a whole lot of people that could use that. That's something that's functional that people see. a test on a pedestrian is 50 grand on paper, not knowing the ins and outs of that to me is an absolute waste of ratepayers' funding. So I think we need to focus on projects that tangibly give people something that they see for their money. We don't stop doing everything. If it's something that comes through and, you're getting, your point about everybody's money is ratepayers' money, but if we're getting funding from somewhere else to do these things, well, we need to be better at communicating that that's not ratepayers' money. We've done the background, and this money is coming in from elsewhere because we've done our background. So I think there's wins to be had here. We have to be careful about how we do it. We need to look at the optics of it, of making sure that it's things that are in front of people that they see that's not perceived to be wasted. But I don't think, I don't think that we do this as it is here, but I don't think we do nothing either.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it a case of them, Chair, revisiting
Yes.
the outcomes
Yes.
that you believe are appropriate? I don't want to, however, give you an illusion that doing the preparation for those outcomes is necessarily able to be done on the smell of an oily rag. I mean, even drawing concept plans and doing surveys to do concept plans, say for one way, is an expensive process because it is.
It is, but I think we should focus on the easy wins at this time.
So I guess the question the burning question I have is, yes, we can get this funding, but what does it cost the business in the meantime to do that? Because the hidden cost is staff time, and like I said before, comms get pulled into it. It's not just the pop team, it's comms, it's roading, and that's where I get challenged around justifying spend. But I'm open to whatever else. James, you've got a comment to make?
So I was just going to make a point. For example, transport choices, which we've done a little bit of work on. We've hired fixed term a specific project manager to out of that fund to drive that. Okay?
I think that's the kind of reassurance that we need to be able to reassure the community.
Yep. And the intention was that for this work also that we look at acquiring a project manager, because somebody needs to drive it as a project. And to be candid, it does involve different parts of the organisation, right from the, and it is a whole organisational issue. I mean, you do streetscape in the middle of town, and suddenly you will have the roading people, the reticulation people, the whatever involved in the work, because they have to be. So to some extent, some of those things we either do them.
And this is the 15% that we talked about in putting in place these things.
Absolutely. Some might be 10%, Bruce. Some might be 20%. It depends. It depends on the project. Now, I think it's important that we've got your confidence as to which project you feel you'll be able to defend, should people question you about them. What are the projects you think are able to be justified in these times?
So then we nearly need to revisit
Yes.
this plan.
Yes, that's a really good exercise. I don't know whether we would do it as part of this.
No.
I'm thinking right now. And if that's the brief, and if that's the due diligence we're applying here, then my challenge to the mayor would be that needs to be much broader than things on the private place. Simple as that.
Discuss that later.
So, Russell,
Is there a timing on the Better Off funding drawing down?
We've got 4 years.
We've got 5 years to spend it.
And the other one, I'd like to know, $2,500 for the skate park. What are you doing? You're just washing it.
So, in fairness, some of these things are estimates. And I mean, when we sit down and hopefully agree with council, or council advises us as to the projects they feel they can justify, we can agree on the process and what that might cost, because it's just not a case of saying we want that done and there'd be no preparation and no process around how we get that done.
Another conversation.
So pride of place and the consultation, all right, and the general feeling of, if we have better pedestrian access around town, all right, if we have an ability to create a green space, and I'd cut off Canada Street from Thames Street down to at least the front of the civic complex, all right? It creates, that personally, it would create that civic space that we don't have today. We could come up with a concept like that and go out and say, what do you think? And you get the feedback, and you go to the chamber, who are quite influential in being able to convince other people, all right, that we're doing the right thing. Then you start to get an ability to say, this is what we're going to spend some money on. And I'd endorse $130,000 if we can say what it actually, and get them to say, yeah, I agree with that, before we spend it.
Sure.
It's just bad timing. It's just bad timing.
Yeah, sure. My experience tells me that to get to that point of agreement is a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And you need somebody focused on it that drives that project, or it can languish. So I just put that caveat out there that don't underestimate the amount of effort that will be required.
I guess it's not, obviously the funding is from the better off. I guess it's, are we comfortable with this as it is? Or are we wanting more information to defer this decision?
I want to know what those, what those, sorry, I've just lost it again, where's it gone? Sorry. I want to know what, the town centre accessibility program, for example, and the test events, I want to know what they actually are, instead of just a broad term.
Yep.
And it's not just those, it's the whole, all of them. I want to see.
So
yeah. Because I think the key point here is that if Joe Public was to read this and we've approved it, we don't even know what we've really approved.
Exactly.
That's the point, John. And especially in this time when the spotlight is on us, because there's this rate rise, and it looks just carte blanche.
Mhm.
It isn't a lot of money in the sense that a lot of it's coming from the better off, but we all know that there's you said, there's resources there that
which
come
would
out
be
of
paid
the-
for.
And I mean, sure, it
Will it
could
be paid for?
It could be that we reprioritise things, instead of spending that 60,000 on the offset, on the straight away, we start with, that one's $10,000, let's do that instead of,
I just think there's a bit of prioritising.
And I think off the back of that too, with street test events and things, it's not just what does that program entail, but if it's a win, how much does it then cost to implement that thing, and what's the time frame? Because if you're spending 50 grand doing a test on a pedestrian crossing, but nothing's actually going to happen until 3 years down the track, we've wasted 50 grand on a test that's never going to get implemented. So there need to be quick wins as well.
Yes.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That's a really good point. And I think the point about bringing, and we had the intention is to bring a project manager on to drive the implementation process. It has to plan right from day one through to the finalisation of the whatever is to be done.
Bruce.
But so we get down to it. We can endorse the concept. That's what I thought we did 3 or 4 weeks ago, whatever it was. Right? We've got to be specific on what was
on the detail and the prioritisation.
So I guess in principle we support.
I support that.
Yeah.
This is a lot of money at this time.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's not
At this moment. At this moment.
It's
We're still a little bit more. I mean, that's.
a lot of optics more than it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I think, Your Worship, it is safe to say that we all want POP to work and to be successful, since we've all endorsed it. We've got skin in this game too. and as Sue was so well articulated, the timing is terrible and wounds are still raw and open. So maybe we implemented as Sarah Jane has suggested, we stagger it somehow, if that's an option, or we say to people, hey, look, we've got this $60,000 thing we want to do, but we're thinking maybe we do a 10,000 in this quarter and then 10,000 in the next quarter. Just run these things a bit more smoothly, and then give ourselves the chance to heal from the old battle wounds of the last fortnight.
I guess it's articulating exactly what these things are. Russell.
If 40,000 or 60,000 for the Hitana Reserve Summer Series, which I don't know the ins and outs of, 40,000 of that's from the long-term plan. That would give it, imagine, a little bit of a kickback if it went out to screening like that. Can that 40,000 be added to the Better Off funding rather than a long-term plan funding?
Or do we,
That's
leave
exactly-
do we leave the chamber to do it?
That's-
This is the key. I mean, why?
That's exactly that's exactly the point. The idea of using the pot money was to leverage other funds. Now, for example, the Transport Choices Fund, which is we're going to expend in each of the three towns, was acquired partly because of the work we've done around POP. The footpath we're getting in Morrisville Rec Ground, we got external funding for that, partly because of the work we've done through POP. Because when you make these applications, you have to demonstrate that there's a substance to whatever it is you're asking for. So the continuing ambition was to utilise the POP funding to continue to access other funds. I had to say, I suppose that Waka Kotahi funding streams are probably going to be more constrained than they were for various obvious reasons, and potentially other funding sources as well. But that was the intention, and one of the arguments for uplifting the Better Off funding was to allow us to leverage other funds from other sources.
Okay, so a way forward, anybody?
Revisit.
Someone, Kevin, have you got a comment to make?
We're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, really, aren't we? I do. We have sort of endorsed these in the past, and yet the optics look like crap. Perception-wise, it's going to look bad, but I just want more details on what's going to happen and something of substance to come out of it for the public, so they know that we're actually doing something with the money that's benefiting everybody.
Can we progress this by saying that in principle, we're agreeing to use Better Off funding, but we need to know more specifically what it's spent on. And I don't know how
Priorities.
Yeah.
We need to
So would
agree
you like
to
to
those.
move that?
We need to agree to some priorities, not to know. We need to agree to some priorities.
Well, so
Yeah, I agree.
the staff need to know that they're not going to be spending weeks and weeks putting something together for us to throw it away.
Well, they need
They need to know that if they come to us with some definite plans of how they're going to spend the money, that we will provide this funding.
No, because we may not want to fund some of those
That's
projects.
exactly right. But the point is that it's pointless them going away and working on it when we haven't agreed in principle that.
Well, we need to get more detail. We need to come back to this
Okay.
situation.
I think that, like, if you're going to do something like what you're saying about the all that might be done, I think it starts from anything that is getting an external funding source given to it. I mean, that's not tax, that's not our ratepayers' money. that's coming from government. So if anything in there that we can do that's getting any sort of funding towards from
Try
an
and
external
explain the
source,
Katana Street to people.
there's no money in there from an external
Try and,
source.
no, but try and explain what happened with Katana to our people.
Yeah, which was external.
Okay, James.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I would do, but I really feel like we just need to park this and really not
Yes.
make any commitment,
Correct.
because of course, Dane, I mean, as it stands, my understanding is that the library story walk, which is funded from Transport Choices, is going ahead. It doesn't require anything further from us today to happen. Like, that's happening, right? So the only way that we could make any sort of, I mean, I just think it needs to be parked, and we really need to sort out here first what we need to do before we make any additional requests to the staff for the information that they need to bring. Because I'm hearing a number of different criteria, all of which are valid, but that people are measuring them against. So let's just make sure we understand what the criteria are that we're going to be using and why. And then we can go through and do this, because I think there's as the Deputy Mayor indicates, there's a balance. There's also a balance in terms of the direction that we give to the staff. Like, are we actually here to work out how $2,500 is spent, or is there some degree of governance about the broad direction? So we can just go through these individually and see if any of them people are prepared to commit to. Like, I'm obviously persuaded by the stuff that comes from the Chamber of Commerce in Morrisville, and happy to support that. But if there's not majority support, then maybe we just park everything. And our task here, which we can do today, later, is working out the criteria that we would use to make that decision, and make the commitments that we're prepared to make.
Yeah, so I guess that's the thing, is I'm asking you if you want to defer the decision.
I'll move to defer.
I'll second it.
The only thing, sorry, before we make a vote on that, the only thing around that is how long are we deferring for? Because we do need to give direction to the staff, and we do take Dane's point. We do need to get some momentum in some of the projects around the towns as well. So,
Well, some things are obviously in train.
correct. But it's just around those other things. So yeah, so we need to give some urgency around
So if you,
our deliberations.
so if you look at Matamata, all right, and you, where there's no better off funding on there, a lot of it's got Transport Choices costings. They're going ahead anyway.
Yeah.
So they're, pardon? So we're not going to park those, definitely. So they're going through.
Cool. Yeah, that's
All
fine. Yep.
So I'm just wondering whether, so as part of the motion, you wanted to indicate the date that it's deferred to. So we've got a meeting on the 7th, and then we've got a meeting on the 28th. So
Because it's potentially quite full. Just, it might not be. We've requested staff to not put additional items on. Yes. That's what we said.
So is there any harm in it being taken out to the next meeting on the 28th?
well, I guess it's
Like, it's another month critical to staff. That's the question I have.
Well, I'm just taking on board James's point about I mean, I guess I understand what you're saying, James, and wanting to keep up the momentum, but I don't know if there's an alternative.
I know we've got to get that process right. Get that. So if that's what's that, 3 weeks?
Realistically, we're saying the 28th of June, right? So I'm not sure if you okay.
I'm fine. I just want us to be very comfortable. That's all that we can stand and look
That
at.
we can show that we have actually considered.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's bad time.
So it's moved it, seconded Caleb. Any further comment to be? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. It's a difficult decision to make, but I think we have to show walk the talk here. Right, okay, so the next item is 7.8, which is the adoption of the council strategic direction. That's Erin again.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is just seeking council adoption for the strategic direction, which will form part of our long-term plan. So we've had a couple of workshops with this, and as directed, I've made it more succinct, hopefully. So seeking your endorsement of this today, it does provide quite a crucial building block to our long-term plan.
Okay, so any comments, questions? My laptop's having a fun time today.
Was it plugged in? No, like, is it? held in?
Just have it. Except my IT help.
Have you turned it off and turned it on?
Yeah, turn it off, turn it on.
Control of delete.
Okay,
Okay, questions for Erin on the annual plan, adoption of council strategic direction, I mean. No comment?
Yes.
Any, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do any of the strategic directions involve pride of place? Like the healthy community scenario?
Through the chair, my recollection is that there was one reference around orientating our grants towards placemaking. That doesn't include, obviously, in addition to that, but that was just for our community grants process.
That's cool. Just as long as we don't have a deferred one and then said we're going to do it in the next one, so that's fine.
Well, you know, the first one says create vibrant, welcoming town centres, and that's what we're using pride of place for.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess this is our long-term plan, and what we're looking at with that previous conversation was our budget, the budget in the coming year, which is the one that's under the most pressure. So strategically, long-term, POP still sits in the long-term.
It sits on all of those.
Yeah.
Create and maintain green and natural and open spaces and all sorts of things. You know, it's integral to it.
It is.
But it's also Katie's.
So obviously, you know, like this is just a document that we can flesh out more around a strategic direction. You know, this is just an overarching vision, and
This
I
goes
think
out
we need to go more.
Erin, what this goes out? What date?
Oh, sorry, through the chair, this will be part of our long-term plan, so that, yeah, and so I guess just to also the opportunity to say that, you know, this is oriented around the full wellbeing as is POP. So the idea is that these, you know, documents do match really nicely and complement each other.
And I guess the important thing here is that we have a really strong strategy with vision going forward. So we need to probably talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, I think we have had a comment that we lack a strong vision. Now, whether that's a comment that is valid or not, but we have to take that on board. We're probably not good salespeople at putting out our vision, but that has been put to us.
And I guess a lot of the things we can plan to do will show the strategy, and perhaps that's what we need to flesh out with ourselves. But this is the overarching document, but it's what goes into the long-term plan or gets proposed in the long-term plan is what is where we need to understand what our, because this is quite an overarching one, and we always link it to all the different philosophies. So any further discussion? Are we happy to adopt it or not? Bruce?
Look, we've discussed this. We did all the little, you know, you know, and this is what it came about. I'll move.
Yep, moved Bruce, seconded Russell. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Kev. Saw your thumbs up. All righty, now we move on to item 7.11, proposed private plan change 58, Avenues Business Park, Lawrenceville. Thank you, Ellie.
Morning, Mayor Adrian and councillors. Today I'm here to talk about proposed private plan change 58, Avenue Business Park in Morrinsville. Warwick and Marion Skefford have applied under Schedule 1 of the Resource Management Act for a private plan change to rezone land north of Morrinsville between Avenue Road and State Highway 26 from rural to a new general industrial zone. The new general industrial zone is helping us transition from our existing format to the national planning standards. In addition to rezoning to general industrial, the applicant has proposed a development area plan. A development area plan is just the new terminology for a structure plan. It shows roads and critical infrastructure. And in this case, it also proposes a landscape buffer. The private plan change is supported by comprehensive technical reports such as transportation, urban design, infrastructure, landscaping, and geotechnical matters, along with some others. Planning staff have looked at all of this information and have deemed it to meet the statutory requirements. So, i.e., we believe it meets Section 32 of the Resource Management Act. Therefore, we're here today to make a recommendation. Council under the Resource Management Act has 4 options. You can either reject the application, and that has really limited grounds on whether you can reject the application. You can decide to process it as if it was a resource consent. So determine that the resource consent is the better process than a private plan change. You can accept the request for notification, and what that means is you accept that it has met the statutory requirement for a plan change to progress to the next stage, but the applicant stays in charge and bears all the cost of that plan change. Or you have the option to adopt it. Adopting it means it is no longer an application to council, it is a council plan change. Our recommendation here, and that is in line with the wishes of the applicant, is for council to accept the plan change for notification. This means that the plan change stays with the applicant and all costs are borne by the applicant. In addition to that, just by accepting this plan change, it does not mean that you are supporting the application. You're just saying that it meets the requirement, has all the information that is needed to take the next step for notification. It does not mean that you are supporting it in terms of all of that information. That decision will come later. Just of note, there is a couple of things that we are still working towards. We do believe it meets that threshold, but there is a couple of things that staff are still working with the applicant on, such as a developer agreement, if necessary, looking at roads, infrastructure, and also making sure that our infrastructure has the capacity in the pipe networks and at our headworks when this development is to be proposed. What I'm saying there is that currently at the moment, our infrastructure is probably not up to date to accept all the loadings today, but the applicant has offered for not to undertake development for about 3 years until our development contributions policy gets updated and Susan's undertaken all those modelling. So we're just working through the finer details of those with the applicant at the moment. And those can all be covered through a submission. We are confident that the information supplied meets the resource management threshold at this point. So our recommendation is there on the front page that proposed private plan change 58 Avenue Business Park is accepted by council in accordance with clause 25(2)(b) of part 2 of schedule 1 of the Resource Management Act, and council resolves to notify private plan change 58 Avenue Business Park in accordance with clause 26 of part 2 of schedule 1 of the Resource Management Act as soon as possible. Just a note, we are proposing to publicly notify the application. That allows everybody to have, has the ability to have their say. We'll also be sending out notices to those that are directly affected. Any questions?
Questions, anybody? Sharon.
Thanks,
Oh,
Jane.
sorry. No, I was going to say I don't have a question, but thank you for the thorough explanation. That was really good, and probably filled a few holes for me too. But no, I was just supporting the recommendation of the sense.
Sharon.
Just to clarify, does the plane change go Avenue Road to the roundabout or across the roundabout straight to Kirione? Like, is it the whole of, no?
No, so it is
Just to,
It's about 10.
so do you know where the existing development's happening on Avenue Road?
so it doesn't affect the top part?
No, it's on the other side of the road.
It's all the other side of the road.
It's the development,
So-
yeah, there's a, where it's all happening, the industrial.
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
tacking on to what's been,
This might
the
be
area
helpful.
being developed.
Everything came under separate covers.
Just straight down there.
So here's the top pub here.
Yeah.
That's, and this is separate
Yeah.
cover, 700 pages of
This is
separate
the
cover.
side here, so
Yeah.
Wouldn't cut
220 pages.
Okay.
It wasn't good.
So I've got James as a mover, James T, who is seconder. Thank you, James. All those in favour, please say aye.
Uh,
No, we'll only see
Anyone
the cover
against?
in the bum.
It was James T.
Yeah.
Right, I think that's all our business for this meeting. We just have to have a, can we move please into public excluded? Thanks, Russell, a seconder. Thank you, Gary. All those in favour? Against? Carried, okay. We've stopped streaming.